In the summer carnage of 1944, Hill 112 is the key to Normandy. A deadly killing zone for Hitler's elite SS Panzers, and a graveyard for the British regiments that confront them.
This mortar bomb went off behind me. And as I crawled back to my slit trench, this leg was dragging after me. I thought, oh, I've lost my leg.
The rapidly shifting front line creates a totally new war of attrition.
There were chaotic and busy times. We would lose commanders left, right and centre.
Controversial decisions and suicidal assaults make Hill 112 a monument to defiance.
It's a clear symbol of sacrifice, blood lost, even senseless slaughter.
Three weeks after the massive amphibious invasion of the D-Day landings on the 6th of June 1944, the Allied advance has stalled. To break out of Normandy, they must seize and hold the strategically vital high ground, Hill 112. However, the British will to take it is only matched by the German determination to keep it at any price.
Rommel himself said that whoever held Hill 112 held Normandy. You could see it all the way around. So it had to be taken at all costs.
Field Marshal Rommel knows it controls his front line in an area known as Death Valley.
If the Germans can hold on to Hill 112, they can sweep the valley with firepower and prevent any real substantial British or Canadian advance. And so they have to capture Hill 112.
The moment you stand on top of that hill, you see that it gives you a completely commanding view of the entire surrounding area. And this is why this position was absolutely crucial to the Battle of Normandy in 1944.
The high point along a 2-kilometer ridgeline, Hill 112 is hard to identify, but rises 112 meters above the surrounding fields. A perfect defensive position for the Nazis.
It's going to be a massive undertaking at the best of time, and it's made much worse by the German defenders they're going to encounter. Waffen SS unit, both armored and mechanized, who have long fought on the Eastern Front, who know what they're doing, and who are ready to defend the hill.
It falls to men from Scotland and the English West Country to enter this killing ground and storm the strategic ridge, even though the Germans can see them coming.
You're on edge all the time. You can get killed any time, any second. If anybody tells you they weren't scared, then they're lying. Or they wasn't there, one of the two. I was scared all day, every day.
The fighting in Normandy is far worse than anyone predicted or planned for. The Germans exploit the natural terrain brilliantly, particularly the thick bocage hedgerows, and make the Allies bleed for every meter.
If you're under a lot of shell fire, that's when the shakes start. So there's a fear, constant fear and worry. It just gets to you in the end.
Daily casualty rates start to surpass anything from the First World War or the Eastern Front, as the advance grinds to a halt.
The situation in Normandy in late June is essentially one of stalemate. Not only have the Allies not successfully advanced into the interior of France, they're actually still quite close to the beaches themselves.
The Allied plan is for the Americans in the west to take the port of Cherbourg and then Saint-Lô, while the British and Canadians flank Caen, moving east via Hill 112. But they now face up to 8 panzer divisions.
Hitler's ambition was always attack, 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 attack. So what he wanted to do was to concentrate his panzer divisions, his main strike force, in one almighty punch.
Adolf Hitler is actually thinking about ways that he might force the British and Americans and Canadians back into the sea. That will force the Allies to withdraw entirely from northern France.
It is now vital that the Allies stop this German counterattack, punch a hole in the front line, and destroy the Panzers.
The British commander, Bernard Montgomery, is actually coming under very heavy criticism to get moving. He's got to break out. We've got to break out of this stalemate and get going. But he can't figure out a way to do it.
Under pressure, General Montgomery decides to risk a massive offensive named Operation Epson. A huge thrust by 3 divisions through the German front line, across the River Odon and on to take Hill 112. But the Germans are determined to hold the high ground at any cost, using 2 of their most elite SS Panzer divisions. On the 26th of June 1944, the scene is set for an epic struggle. The advance is spearheaded by the 15th Scottish Division, which punches an 8-kilometre deep hole in the Nazi front line at great cost.
That was known as the Scottish Corridor, and before it was named Death Valley. And all over, it took 3,000 men died and wounded to take that hill. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the war.
After 2 brutal days, the advance units capture the bridge at Tourmeville and cross the River Odon.
The Odon Valley is really quite narrow, and it's a gift for the defenders. The Germans can look down all the time on anyone coming up the hill.
B Squadron, 23rd Hussars, initially approach very slowly, allowing the Germans to rally their defences. The British Sherman tanks climb up the old Roman road at the foot of the hill's long northern slope, under heavy fire from SS Panzer Grenadiers and supporting tanks.
The fact that the British approach was so painstakingly slow gave them enough time to prepare their defensive positions and start engaging the enemy from a favourable tactical position.
10 Panzers counterattack as the British struggle to win and hold the small orchard, just halfway to the ridgeline.
We worked our way forward, each panzer giving the other covering fire. Now the forest came back to life. Fire from rifles and machine guns was pinging against the armor. We were covered by mortar and artillery fire.
You didn't move. You had to keep under cover. But you might have 4 or 5 dead cows in the field. And, you know, there's nothing to gosh, is the smell of death.
In the chaos of a fast-moving battle, your own artillery fire can be as deadly to friend as foe.
Saw this explosion, and 2 chaps that had been walking along were dead. One was absolutely blown to bits, you might say. He was skinned, and his mate was laying on the ground full of holes from shrapnel. But we still think that it was one of ours that fell short.
The British send in more troops, as nearly 40 Shermans are destroyed by the infamous German 88s.
Which were renowned, and rightly so, as the best anti-tank weapon, tank killer of the entire war. Incredibly powerful gun. You're just outgunned. It's as simple as that. Theirs is bigger and has got a longer range than yours has. So you have to get close. So your only chance of defeating them is to drive towards them as fast as you can and hope that they don't kill you before you get close enough to hit them. And as a military tactic, that's not got much going for it.
Particularly against the fanatical troops of the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend.
We didn't mind the average German. We didn't like these SS fellows. The unit we were against was the 12th Panzer, and they were the German youth, you know, teenagers, and they were horrors.
17 and 18-year-old volunteers from the Hitler Youth back in Germany. And they were trained to be aggressive and to prove themselves in battle as the very vanguard of Nazism. And it made them, one, a very, very potent force. They just held out and held out and held out, most of the time to annihilation. And indeed, very, very few Hitlerjugend prisoners were ever taken.
The fact that they had massacred scores of captured Canadian troops and French civilians enhanced their brutal reputation. But their ruthlessness is here aided by the failure of British battlefield tactics. Rather than the infantry quickly advancing to destroy the German 88s, decimating the British armour, the British stop and dig in.
The tank crew is then saying, why are the infantry, lying on the ground and not moving forward and clearing those anti-tank guns without which we can't advance?
The British fall short of the ridge, but do cling on to the north side of the hill overnight.
He was in battle for 24 hours. I mean, most nights was a little bit on a peaceful side, but you still couldn't take any chances. You couldn't say, right, I'm going to take my boots off and have a sleep. You had to keep everything on as you would.
The British suffer more heavy losses, trying to take this strategically vital target. Then, they are suddenly ordered to retreat. Why have the Allied generals betrayed their men's sacrifice? The British withdraw with heavy casualties. Many are angry after the lives lost, but others are relieved to escape the hell.
The rocket launchers were firing right above us toward the hill. The Tommies were on the run. When we reached the top, it was all over.
We went into that battle pretty well head on. They were chaotic and busy times. We would lose commanders left, right and centre. The entire officer clan of their company was wiped out in one go. So you would find that platoons would be commanded by sergeants to a very large degree.
What the troops on the ground do not know is that a massive new German force is about to intervene. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps, with 2 battle-hardened panzer divisions from the east, has just arrived in Normandy and is quickly ordered to retake Hill 112. This signals the German determination to control the ridgeline at all costs and turns it into a decisive battlefield.
The battle for Hill 112 could have all ended completely differently had we held on that first night. But we had no concept of just how valuable it was to the Germans. So when they deploy, they arrive not just with infantry, but with tanks, and that makes all the difference.
It's now known that secret ultra intercepts from the Bletchley Park codebreakers, combined with some captured German plans revealed to General Montgomery, that the 2nd SS Panzer Corps is about to storm the hill.
They knew that their exposed troops on the hill would not be able to withstand a German concentrated armour attack.
But the Allies still need the high ground to break out of Normandy. Just over a week later, General Montgomery decides to use another unit to tackle it, the 43rd Wessex Infantry Division. They plan a three-phased attack to isolate and take the ridgeline, with supporting thrusts on both flanks to storm the nearby villages. Massive use of air power and artillery will aim to destroy the SS Panzers arrayed against them. But the 43rd Wessex is a largely untested unit.
But the core is of an old guard who all know each other and volunteered to soldier during the interwar period. That doesn't make them any less proficient or effective than a traditional regular army unit.
So putting up a relatively inexperienced infantry division against an armour-heavy, experienced German SS Panzer division was always going to be a tough ask.
To make matters worse, the Germans have now dug layers of trenches supported by tanks and artillery on the reverse slope. The terrain forces a narrow frontal assault uphill, after crossing open fields leading right into the Germans' killing zone. A worst-case scenario for the British. But they do have one big advantage: artillery. A massive barrage includes Royal Navy warships over 20 kilometers away, including huge 16-inch guns, while hundreds of Army 25-pounders fire thousands of rounds on the waiting SS and their Tiger tanks.
Günther Hensel fell full length into a bed of flowers. A piece of shrapnel had taken off the back of his head. Poor Günther, who had looked forward with such impatience to his first battle.
Number 2 loaded the gun, and that was a dodgy job, because when the gun fires, the breech comes back a yard. There's a big bang, and there was 2 guns to our left. The crew were all dead. We never did know what caused it.
2/3 of German casualties, as with Allied casualties, are caused by mortar or artillery ammunition. And we forget that. We think it's bullets. It isn't.
The 4th Somerset Light Infantry has to storm the Nazi defences and take the hill, supported by tanks. They launch their assault across open fields, sprinkled with poppies, as the end of the British barrage devastates their own advance guard. And then they hear a terrifying sound as the ground erupts.
11 men dived into the corn for cover, but only one stood up again.
These are the dreaded moaning minis, Nebelwerfer rockets fired from multiple barrel launchers, hidden far away.
Tenth SS Panzer Division, they were dug in trenches like this, barbed wire in front of them and mines out in front of that. Behind them they had dug in tanks behind the brow of the hill, Panzer IVs. They also had 88s and Nebelwerfers, the moaning minis that the British particularly detested. They would also have mortars firing into the cornfield in front of them, and that's what the Somersets were facing as they walked up the hill towards the Germans. Some of them would be armed with a weapon like this. This is an MP40,
mass-produced machine pistol, 9mm, 32 rounds in the magazine, not designed to fire accurate single shots, but to spray the battlefield on automatic fire, 400 to 500 rounds per minute. When the Somersets were walking up the hill towards them, they were entering a killing ground. The other advantage the Germans had on Hill 112 was that they had defence in depth. They had several lines of defences. So once the Somersets got close and they were going to take the first line of trenches, all the Grenadiers had to do was jump out of their trenches, get back to the second line and continue the fight. This was the other advantage that the Germans had. They were now back in their second line of trenches, still looking down the slope towards the Somersets and spraying them with fire.
It takes 4 long, hard hours for the Somersets to battle their way just over half of the kilometre to the top of Hill 112, where their front line stops by the Croix des Filandriers, a shrine to the crucifixion.
The Germans coined a particular phrase for Hill 112, and they called it in German the Calvarienberg, so the Calvary Hill. It's a place of execution, so it's a clear symbol of sacrifice, blood loss, perhaps even senseless slaughter.
We came under really intense artillery fire, the whole area. And a shell actually directly hit the vehicle we were under. And when the smoke and dust had cleared, they were all dead. And it was just me.
Hours more of vicious combat leads to stalemate. When the British survivors finally dig in on the hill's long northern slope.
The skyline was dominated by Churchill tanks, brewing up. Not a pretty sight. They'd all gone too far over the ridge and were knocked out like ninepins. There were dead and wounded men lying all over the ground. Their bodies burnt, black all over.
They desperately need more tanks to advance further. But the British commander of the watching armoured unit refuses to support them. Brigadier Michael Carver is in charge of the 4th Armoured Brigade, tasked to help the hill assault. He is young, but has been quickly promoted after decorated service in North Africa, and now confronts his own divisional commander.
He insisted that I should order my tanks to advance over the crest. I said that I expected the leading regiment to take at least 75% casualties. Finally, he accepted my arguments.
The decision not to deploy the tanks and to support the infantry in its attack has been extremely controversial.
No Panzer commander would have refused such a request, but many defend Brigadier Carver's decision.
And he does that with every justification because of the German anti-tank capability and the threat of German armour.
As a result, the British offensive to take the hill grinds to a halt. However, the flanking assaults by other parts of the 43rd Wessex take the largely deserted villages, such as Eski, due west, and Malto to the east, before losing them to determined German counterattacks the same day. But as the Panzers start to move in support, they become prey to a key Allied advantage: air power.
Air support for the ground forces was directed and targeted bombing by smaller aircraft like Typhoons. If we felt any pity for the Germans, we felt it then. It was like a slaughterhouse. Dead horses everywhere, wrecked vehicles.
They rush like a swarm of veritable hornets and shower us with a hail of bombs. Simultaneously, smoke grenades envelop everything around us in a few minutes in impenetrable white. This method of fighting was really new to us. We had never seen anything like this in any theater of war.
With the noise of an express train, the field seemed to rise up in flames. Explosions tore at the tortured earth. My comrade at my side had become a mass of gory rags. In front of me was the company dispatch rider with no legs.
It was that air power that really tipped the balance in Normandy towards the British, the Canadians, and the Americans. Massive number of fighter bomber planes coming from Britain and coming from airfields in France who would lash into the Germans with an enormous amount of bombs and rockets and machine gun bullets. It made it almost impossible for the Germans to move it during the day.
But worsening weather and a low cloud base stops them shifting the embedded panzers dug in on the wooded hillside. The 43rd Wessex commanders meet and agree that the hill must be taken, no matter what the cost. They make the difficult decision to send in the divisional reserves, the 5th Duke of Cornwall's light infantry. Some of them realize it is virtually a suicide mission.
This is a challenge that happens throughout history, is that you're sending soldiers to die, but they know how strategic that hill is and how necessary it is to capture it.
The 5th Cornwalls are a raw but highly trained reserves unit, now led by a popular lawyer, Dick James. He is 26 years old. The German High Command declares the hill a key position.
On no account must Hill 112 be given up. It is the pivot for the whole front. We must hang on to Hill 112.
General Eberbach has also decided to unleash his only armor reserves, the rest of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. The 10th SS Panzers, already defending Hill 112, are now bolstered by the 9th SS Panzer Division and the 102nd SS Heavy Panzers. They ring Hill 112 in steel, on 3 sides.
So these were 2 divisions that were going to be used in a violent counterattack. And instead what happens is they are drawn into a battle on top of the hill, which means they can't be used anywhere else.
This decision effectively ends any hope of Hitler's dream for a mass armoured counterattack in Normandy. But it also means the Cornwalls lack a key element needed for any successful attack: numerical superiority.
5th, Cornwalls definitely did not have a 3-to-1, and in fact they were outnumbered themselves, and so their chances of success were very slim indeed.
Supported by just 14 tanks, they move past the Somerset's forward positions and assault towards the orchard on the hill.
Once both sides had decided that Hill 112 had to be held, the result is a meat grinder for the ordinary soldier. And those reinforcements keep killing each other, keep destroying each other, keep fighting each other into complete and utter destruction.
As an infantry soldier, when you're attacking a layer defence, particularly going uphill, you have to kind of break it down into bite-sized chunks. So you don't look at the final objective, you look at intermediate objectives to get there.
The fighting is so intense and close. Allied air power plays no role. The West Countrymen even catch German stick grenades and throw them back. Going past burnt-out hulks and dead bodies, it takes 4 hours for the decimated Cornwalls to fight their way to the second, larger woods on the hilltop, forcing the SS Panzer Grenadiers to retreat to their final defensive position.
It was a dry stone wall overgrown with bushes. It gave good cover and a good field of fire. Behind that ditch, the slope ran on downhill for 1,000 yards without a scrap of cover. We always said we had to hold that ditch or die in the attempt. Tommy never got that far.
What you do is you fight within your little group of men. You fight for the people next to you and with you. And that's basically the inner cohesion. This is also what made the German army, the German Wehrmacht very, very strong, because they put an awful lot of emphasis on small unit cohesion.
The German counterattack causes crippling casualties as it pushes the Cornwalls back to the woods on the hilltop. Then it gets worse. Panzers now drive them back down the hill to the orchard, before they are rallied by the inspired leadership of 26-year-old Lieutenant Colonel James, and supported by fearsome crocodile tanks with their gruesome killer, the Flamethrower.
It was a mixture of jellied petrol and compressed air. When they fired it, it was awful. It would burn and stick to anything. If they wanted to get some Germans out of the woods, that's what they'd use.
Only darkness brings a very brief respite. The few surviving British tanks leave the devastated hilltop to the Cornwalls. The terrible losses mean there are lots of field rations to go round. Only the tea tastes of petrol. But any hope of rest is quickly shattered by a sustained German artillery bombardment. Then at dawn, Tiger tanks charge through the mist. They quickly advance on the British lines.
We carry out our dawn attack in a northerly direction, on the side of Hill 112, covered by a flat ravine, determined to storm the heights this time.
Afraid we were all asleep. Early in the morning, dawn, heard all this banging and firing going on, and there was one of our tanks, right close as you, shouting at me, because I disappeared out of my hole. He says, "There's a Jerry up the top."
Through the dawn mist, 15 Shermans from the Royal Scots Greys rush up the hill to support the beleaguered Cornwalls. At least one of the attacking Panzers is still on the other side of the hill's brow, protected by the reverse slope.
His gun was facing the other way, so while he was busy twirling his gun round, our gun was onto him. And we got him. He caught fire and moves like that.
The two Shermans on the left have already been silenced by us. Then light bombers appear over the fighting area. Like eagles, they shoot down from the air, loosen their bomb load and pull up.
In fear of the dominant Allied air power, the Panzers quickly overrun the British lines. They destroy 3 more Shermans, as the infantry mount a ferocious defense against the heavily armored Tiger tanks.
Luckily, they didn't have too many of them, but they were very strong tanks. Not great mobility, but very tough tanks. And the awful emotive cry of somebody shouting, "Tiger!" Your adrenaline started to run on.
The outclassed Shermans start to burn. With grim humor, British troops called their tanks Ronsons, after a popular petrol-fueled cigarette lighter, as they usually burst into flames when hit. Grimmer still, the Germans just called them Tommy cookers. As a new unit of Panzer Grenadiers follow the Tigers in, the outgunned Shermans withdraw under the cover of smoke. The remnants of the Cornwalls regroup at the orchard down the north slope. There are now just 126 men left.
Early in the morning, very misty. On top of the hill, the Duke of Cornwalls. Advancing up towards them, German SS Panzer Grenadiers, and worst of all, Tiger tanks. Most of the Cornwalls are armed with one of these, a Lee Enfield 303 bolt-action rifle. 10-round magazine, very, very good against enemy infantry. Lee Enfield, no good against Tiger tanks. What the Cornwalls had was this, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, better known as the PIAT.
A PIAT is like a small cannon, right? But it's a terrible weapon, really. And I was never been weak, but it was all I could do to cock it.
The Americans had the bazooka, the Germans the Panzerfaust and the Panzerschreck. It does have some useful advantages. There was no backblast, so what that means is that the position of the firer is not going to be given away to the tank crews that it's firing at. But it also had some disadvantages. Firstly, it's incredibly heavy and difficult to move. So the round would go up here onto this spigot. On top of the spigot, it's a heat round, high explosive, anti-tank. With the weapon in firing position, round in, sight up, Panzer 50, 80 or 110 metres, aim up, fire. There was no way that one of these rounds was going to take out a Tiger tank from the front. The Cornwall's only chance was to hit it in the rear or a lucky shot on the side.
The fairly useless PIAT and tiny number of men still able to handle a rifle leave the British with only one effective weapon: artillery.
Artillery was frightfully good. We had better artillery than them. They were able to bring down marvellously concentrated fire on any German attack.
Artillery is detested by all infantry, partly because it's an unseen, unhittable enemy. Say, for instance, a 105mm shell. Where it lands, if you're within 10-15 metres, the actual explosion itself will tear you to pieces. If you're within kind of 30 metres, the blast and the shockwave will rip you to shreds. Your internal organs will be broken apart as well. And then out to about 80 metres, it's shrapnel. Shrapnel is the infantry killer.
When a wave passes through a human, it alters them right down to the cellular level. It makes things bleed worse. It opens up soft tissue that might otherwise have remained closed. So it does more damage to soft tissues in areas like the stomach, in the chest, and in the face. And over the long term, it's going to make pain and recovery and all the processes of life beyond survival much, much worse.
Despite the Cornwall's best efforts, the SS Panzer Grenadiers and Tiger tanks were almost on top of their positions. They'd taken very, very heavy casualties, and their last chance of coming out of this fight alive was to bring down their own artillery almost on their own positions, what we call danger close. To do that, they needed an accurate fix on the enemy as humanly possible. For elevation, a spotter would hopefully get up a tree to give us best picture of the enemy as possible, and then using binoculars would then pinpoint the enemy on the map. The spotter would then turn to the signaller and using the number 18 radio set would communicate a fire mission to the gun line several miles to their rear. It's a simple machine, on and off, and a series of tuning levers. X-ray 33, this is X-ray 0 Alpha. Fire mission over. X-ray 33 shot out. X-ray 33, drop 50, left 50, over. Spotter is asking the gun line to push the rounds 50 metres further away and draw them 50 metres in from the left. They will then wait for the next impact, hopefully right on target. X-ray 33, on target, fire for effect, over. The artillery would then fire a full salvo into the German Panzer Grenadiers and their supporting Panzers. It's the last hope when you're about to be overrun, and it was the Cornwall's last ditch defence.
Shells were exploding on the hull and turret. They were breaking off the branches in the treetops. Our Panzer Grenadiers couldn't even raise their heads. Many brave comrades were left dead on the slopes.
It was defensive fire such as we East Fronters had never known. The Russians had never as many guns as this.
The Cornwall's young commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James, climbs a tree to get a more accurate map reference. But then he is hit and falls down, almost decapitated. His loss is a devastating blow to morale. But the near-suicidal artillery storm stops the German advance. It also allows the British to retake the wood beside the hilltop, at a cost. They lose 66 of the remaining 126 men. The 60 survivors face annihilation, as 6 more Tigers and another new battalion counterattack. The few British still able to fight again dig in around the shattered woods. They manage to destroy 3 armoured assault guns, but are then forced to retreat back down the hill in the face of overwhelming odds. The scale of the fighting is now etched in the landscape itself.
The wood has completely changed its face in these days. Bleak, bare tree trunks accusingly raise their stumps to the sky. And the countless craters give the impression of a lunar landscape.
After less than 2 days' combat, the Cornwalls have been forced to abandon the bodies of many comrades in the wasteland.
The sight was beyond all imagination. The dead, friend and foe, lay in masses on the open ground right up to the little wood. The air was putrid, with the smell of decomposing corpses.
That night, the 4th Somersets try again to reach the top of the ridge, but fail, leaving the whole hill in German hands. The British front line now lies a few hundred meters short of the ridgeline, and they fail to keep control of the flanking villages. Sporadic fighting does continue, with the devastated ridge constantly shelled, but under German control. In just a few days' fighting, the hill has consumed some of Hitler's best troops. A week later, the British and Canadians finally break through the city of Caen, cross the River Orne, and move east, while the Americans secure Saint-Lô and by the end of July have destroyed the German front line in western Normandy. These advances make the once vital hill totally irrelevant. In early August, the 53rd Welsh Division takes it without any opposition. Precise figures are unknown, but it's estimated the German losses exceed 5,000, and the Allies suffer over 7,000 casualties in the wider campaigns to take Hill 112.
Germans simply could not afford to lose man and material. So the Battle of Attrition that took place on and around Hill 112 had an effect of the combat effectiveness of the German forces, here in particular the 2nd SS Panzer Corps.
A handful of British infantry units has largely rendered the 2 SS Panzer divisions unfit for combat. But not all the casualties are physical. The 5th Cornwalls suffered 26 diagnosed shell-shock cases on Hill 112, while their Wessex division records 360. One man shoots himself in the foot as he could not take any more. The worst cases may be lucky enough to be treated in the new psychiatric clinic at London's Guy's Hospital, one of the first of its kind.
The treatment initially would be rest, reassurance, when doctors could begin to talk to him about what he'd been through and suggest ways of restoring his mental health.
But in 1944, even this specialist centre is operating in the dark.
Psychiatrists were finding their way in the Second World War. They were learning about post-traumatic illness.
Or what we would now term PTSD.
It's not until 1980 that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is fully recognised by the American psychiatric profession.
Some of the men who lost so many friends fighting Hitler want to challenge what they see as misconceptions about their experience on the front line.
Talk about these chaps that get killed, how brave they are. They're not brave, they're unlucky. You're not brave to get killed.
They see their war service as doing their duty, to be endured and not glorified.
I wasn't overjoyed, put it that way. I mean, he's someone's brother, someone's son, someone's husband. If it had been the other way around, they'd shoot me. It was just something you had to do and you did it. You don't think about why you did it or how he feels or whatever. You don't get time for that.
I had my breakfast, sausage and whatever, and this mortar bomb went off behind me and then knocked me over. And as I crawled back to my slit trench, this leg was dragging after me. I thought, oh, I've lost my leg. Well, it didn't hurt. No, it doesn't hurt to get wounded. I suppose it happened so quickly.
In the campaign for Normandy, the average daily casualty figures exceed those of the Great War's biggest battles, with over 6,000 lost every day.
So Normandy is more attritional than the worst battles of the First World War for the 2.5 months of its duration, and no one had anticipated that.
The losses are so horrific, they changed the Allies' tactics on the front line. The priority is now to reduce the kind of mass assault that occurred on the hill, and instead to draw the Germans into counterattacks where they will be exposed to the overwhelming Allied air power and artillery.
Hill 112 really epitomizes the way in which, intentionally or not, Normandy had become a war of attrition. What it actually does is end up crippling the German army in a way that wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
The Germans simply can't, get enough men, enough panzers, enough artillery, enough planes, whatever. The Allies wanted to fight not just a battle of attrition, but a battle of material attrition.
The British War Minister praised the troops fighting for Hill 112 as forming the Anvil, upon which the German forces were held and pounded to destruction.